G'day again guys, and thank you for joining me. Man, it feels like ages since I've had a chance to sit down and talk to you guys. Life has been really hectic lately and I've really struggled to get a chance to get any artwork done or to get a chance to sit down at my desk. And it just feels so good to finally get a chance to sit down and talk to you guys and show you my latest artwork. Today's piece was born from a desire to try and push myself and try to do something new. I've been having a little bit of an artistic identity crisis, and I've been looking over my past work lately and trying to understand where I want to take this and who I want to be as an artist. As I look back, I see a lot of pieces featuring feathers and fur, and while I truly love what I draw, I feel like I've gotten into too much of a pattern where I'm really not pushing myself to explore new subjects. So I wanted to find something very different to my usual choice. Now, I didn't know what I had in mind, so I popped over to the ever wonderful wildlifereferencephotos.com and had a scroll on through the images. Now, of course, most of the photos were full of the same birds and animals that I usually are drawn to, but then I noticed a little gallery for the aquatic animals, and I knew what I had to do. I scrolled through and found a pose of a sea turtle that I really liked, but I wasn't keen on the surface of the water in that particular image. So I popped on over to Pixabay and I searched for images of the light coming through the surface of the water. Now, I desperately needed a reference for this, since I'm not at all familiar with how that should look, and I knew I wouldn't be able to just wing that successfully. So I found an image that I liked, and I did the dodgiest Photoshop on earth to bring those two images together. I didn't need this Photoshop job to look good, I just needed an idea of placement and scale so that I could finally get started on the fun stuff. My first step was to tackle the water. My goal here was to create water that gave a sense of depth and distance. I started with the water surface, working in horizontal lines with my pencils, instead of building up a solid wall of colour like I usually would. I allowed those horizontal lines to build up slowly, which really added a lot of texture to that water surface. This top part of the water took a very long time to complete because I was building up those layers very slowly with a very light hand. Maintaining a horizontal line here was very important because any diagonal movement would make the water look strangely sloped. But I found creating these horizontal lines was a little bit difficult to maintain for long. So eventually I turned the piece on its side so that I could work in vertical lines, which felt much easier and much more natural to my hand. When I was about 99% happy with the coverage up top, I moved down to the bottom of the piece, slowly building up a gradient using deeper and deeper shades of turquoise. I used a Prussian blue pencil to start adding in hints of texture to the background. This would be the seafloor as it receded off into the distance, so I didn't want to put too much detail into this middle ground. Just the barest hints of smaller rock-like shapes going off into the distance. As I moved down towards the foreground, I allowed those rocky shapes to become more and more defined, making the rock shapes larger and blending out the edges less. But not a single one of these rocks were completely detailed. Even though these bottom rocks would be really close to the viewer, I still wanted them to be slightly distorted by the water. I kept up building up layers of pencil until I was happy with the coverage, and then I put those blue pencils aside for later because I knew they were going to be very important colours to use in the turtle as I went forward. I was actually really happy with the way the background turned out, so I was feeling pretty confident going into the turtle himself. As always, I started with the eyes, and this was a little bit tricky because I couldn't see any of the details in the reference photo at all, and I really didn't want to just leave it as a dark eye. So I turned to Google to see if there were some images I could use to add just a little bit more detail, and wow, I never realised how alien turtles' eyes look. I found myself quite surprised and just a little bit grossed out, but it gave me a good idea on how to complete the eye to give this guy a little bit more personality. With that done, I started work on his head, and with so many little wrinkles and lines, it was a little bit tricky to know how many of these details I would need to add. So I decided to start by adding just the major features of those lines and spots, and then I built up my colours from there. But trying to decide which colours to use is where things started to get really tricky. I wanted to make sure this fellow looked like he was actually in the water, and not just a sticker placed on a background of water. So I knew that I would have to use a lot of the colours that I had used in the water on his colouring. But I also wanted to make him look vibrant and interesting. My solution to this was to only use the red, brown and cream colours on the areas where the light from the surface of the water was hitting the turtle directly. Now, I knew that red light is absorbed very quickly when travelling through water, so the further that light moves, the less of those reds and yellows are going to be able to be seen. So if I only used those colours where the light was hitting him in the strongest way, I could then use my blues and green tones to colour the areas in shadow that would normally be white or brown out of the water. I think this really helped to sell the illusion that this turtle was actually in the water and not just stuck on top. I moved very slowly on this piece from here. A lot of boring everyday life stuff kept getting in the way, and when I did get a chance to work, I found the unfamiliar subject and the colouring to be very, very tiring. I found that I had to keep getting up and stepping away from this piece pretty regularly to prevent myself from getting tired and sloppy. Over the years, I've learned it's pretty unwise of me to keep working when I start to tire out. That's when I start rushing through areas and making silly mistakes that are hard to fix. So now, as soon as I find my attention wandering or I start rubbing at my eyes, I immediately get up and go and do something else for a minute. Usually it's just a cup of tea and a bit of a chance to stretch out for a bit. Look, I drink so much tea, I'm surprised I'm not already preserved from the tannins, but those little 10-minute breaks are important to keep my mind focused when I'm actually at the desk. I found the areas of his neck and underarms to be the most challenging parts of this piece, and they really pushed my limits while I tried to add enough detail to tell the story, but without getting bogged down into drawing every single little crease. This was really challenging because this is the first turtle that I've drawn, and I don't know yet what parts of his anatomy are the most important to tell the story. So I really took my time in these areas, just building up colour and softening it off with my odorless mineral spirits until I started to get a texture that I liked. As challenging as this piece was to create, I must say that I thoroughly enjoyed the process. So here's the end result. It was very satisfying to push my boundaries and to tackle something completely new. I definitely learned a lot from creating this piece, and I do really love the end result. He might be the first, but it certainly won't be the last time I draw one of these gorgeous creatures. I would just like to take a moment to thank my patrons. A real-time video of this piece will be available over on my Patreon page, so pop on by if you'd like to see me create this piece in more detail. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please leave me a like or a comment to tell me what you think, and if you'd like to see some more of my work, then why not hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys.